quite a bit with it too.
Nice, nice. Well, hey, last week was pretty awesome. We had our little field trip out to Edge Homes, a little bit different for our Tuesday night training. I'm glad it was last week instead of tonight. It's cold out there tonight. I think fall's coming. But if you remember, how many of you were on the call the week before that? The week before that, Eric and I were going over a buyer's checklist. Who was on that call?
I was.
Sydney, DL, were you on there? Kim, I think you were on there. You just logged on. I was just asking who was on the call a couple weeks ago when we were going over the buyer's checklist.
I was not, unfortunately.
Okay. So we started going through that just to kind of catch up. Andrea, I think you were on there. This is a long checklist. Eric and I were going through when you put a buyer under contract, some of the things that are on your to-do list, right? How to take that transaction from under contract to close. Now this list is an old one. One of the things we talked about is the more transactions you do over time, you don't really have to refer to the list as often, right? But being new, it's great to have a checklist that you can go through and say, okay, I don't want to miss anything. I was talking to Sydney before this call because she was on the last one, and there was a little bit of a disconnect that she may have had she not spent so much time in our office and seeing the transactions go on as far as how it all meshes together. So when I'm talking from my perspective and Eric's talking from his perspective or whatever, if it doesn't make sense, please, chime up and ask questions and, either ask for further clarification or ask how it all ties together, because I'm having a hard time speaking from where I'm at to where some of you guys are at. And I really want you to kind of get the most value out of it. So Sydney, based on our conversation earlier, is that about the gist of it? Is like sometimes I go a little bit too fast and it doesn't really tie together sometimes for the newer agent?
Yeah, so I was trying to explain to him that because I've had a few go under contract just recently, and I was trying to tell him that if I hadn't gone through that, a lot of what he was going through with this new buyer checklist wouldn't have made sense. But since I actually went through it and had to do this myself, I was following, but I wasn't sure if I hadn't gone through that, if any of this, or if a lot of this would have just gone over my head because I couldn't connect the few, or like the first few points. And then everything after that is kind of like, what, so might have just been me. That was just my perspective. And I don't know how many of you guys were on that call, but yeah, that's just what I was pointing out to him today.
Well, we had a lot more on the call than are on tonight, so some of them aren't back here for the second part, but since that's what we had planned on going over, we'll go over it anyway. So if you weren't on that call, I kind of scrolled through this kind of quick, but like I was saying, this is an old checklist, but it kind of like, hey, what to do first, creating your files and start saving your documents, and who do you notify about being under contract and all that stuff. I'm not going to back up and go over that. I'll try and get you all a link to the recording. I literally just downloaded that. So actually, let me see. Give me 1 second. I just saved it. So maybe I can put a link in the chat box. So those of you that weren't on last week can copy that link. It's going to be just to my Dropbox folder. That's right. Now this Dropbox folder, when I download these videos, and that's part of the reason why I haven't shared all these links, is it does it in several different formats. It does the screen share view. It does the grid view of everybody that's on video. It does this audio only. So there's a few files in this Dropbox. One of them's going to end up being the speaker view and the screen share. So kind of look for that. That link should be in the chat box for those that want part 1 to what we were going over. But like we talked about last week, Eric and I will go through this and kind of polish it up and fine tune it, because like I mentioned, it's an older checklist that I haven't had to refer to for years. So I'm pulling out the archives here. So as I go through this, we'll try and kind of like clean it up a little bit for you, but let's go to where we left off. Anybody have anything else they want to add or ask before we kind of get started? And we'll just kind of pick up where we were last week on where we got to on taking that buyer to under contract to close. All righty. So some of this is review. You can see we've got day 1 in here and week 1. We got down to this kind of week 1 in review. So some of it's duplicated, but then we batch down the transaction in, what happens during week 1, what happens during week 2, what happens in week 3. So let's kind of go through each one of these and please chime in and add any commentary that you have or ask any questions, and let's make sure you figure this out. But there's certain things that have to happen in week 1, especially because we've got deadlines, right? We're working on our due diligence deadline first. Part of what we need from the seller is their disclosures as part of their first deadline, right? I guess is the seller disclosure deadline. And one of those things that we need to get is the PR. Now, a couple of comments I want to make on this. Yes, it's your job to review this and to try and catch things based on your experience that your buyer may not catch. Yes, you can call Eric, you can call myself, you can call somebody else that has looked at these before, and we can go over it together. Most of them are pretty clean. Most of them have some conditions that need to be met on there that are the title company's job to clear so that they can actually issue a title insurance policy, okay? So they're gonna have their own list of requirements, but the one thing that you guys wanna pay particular attention to is what the title company is excluding from their coverage. Give you a quick example. I had a buyer under contract. We got the PR, and as I'm reviewing the PR, I noticed that it had a certificate of non-compliance that was an exclusion from the coverage from the title company. So we got to find out what that is. 2 ways to do that. You can call the title company that issued you that title commitment and ask them produce the document that goes along with that. And I think, well, I don't know if I want to pull up the screen share, but I could show you what that looks like on the title commitment. Actually, let me see if I can do that. Let me stop my share because this is important. So I made the comment that it's your job to review it, but are you responsible for making decisions for your client? No. Ultimately, it's up to them. They have to do their homework. And ideally, they're calling the title company. They're calling the title company so that they can get their questions answered. You're not the lender. You're not the title company. You're not responsible for educating them in those areas that you're not experienced in. Does that make sense? So let me see if this is the right share. Can you see this document? Did the screen share change? Anybody?
I can see it.
Okay, thanks, Coda.
I can see it.
I had pulled up the title commitment before we started this because I was thinking about showing it to you. See this item 13? That's what I'm talking about. This is a certificate of non-compliance. It was issued by the building service, and it just means that the house is not in compliance for something, right? Here's the entry number, the book and page where it's recorded, but what is on this document? I happen to subscribe to the Salt Lake County Recorder's Office online service, which in Salt Lake County, it's a fee service. I've been on it for years and years since I was an investor before I was even a realtor because I can look up documents really fast. You'll see some of this now that's integrated with the MLS, but you can also ask the title company to produce that document for you. And most of them will. They'll just send you a PDF like we're looking at right now. But this was important to draw this to the attention of my client, because even though we tell them, hey, look this over and ask me any questions that might come up when you look this over, they don't know what they're looking at. They don't, I mean, a title commitment, a preliminary title report, what does that really mean? And if they haven't bought a lot of property before, it's going to be really foreign to them. And so you kind of have to put your eyes on it and point out things that might be of concern without, like I said, making up the decision for your client, just kind of like alerting them to potential problems. So this was a flip property, okay? You can see right here, certificate of non-compliance. Here's the items that need to be corrected. I can't highlight that for some reason, but it's down here under item number 5. They pointed out that there was an interior remodel is being completed without permits, new roof, soffits with electrical lighting. Both kitchens have been remodeled and possible new electrical throughout. Building, plumbing, electrical, and mechanical permits are required. Inspections must be scheduled and completed. Now, a lot of flippers do the work without getting an inspection. Here's why this is important to your buyer. This stays with the property. This is not necessarily against the owner. In fact, this inspection officer put the old owner's name in it. The one that we're under contract with is the one that bought it from this item 4 here, this Tana Hunter. She's not even the current owner. So it takes a simple phone call for us as agents to call the planning and building department at the city where the property's located in and ask them about this. So basically it becomes your buyer's problem. So my client intends on renting it out. What if the inspector that issued this followed up with it and they haven't done anything to put the property into compliance, and they don't give me occupants the right to occupy the property? They could put a non-occupancy order on this property until this is cleared up. So now my client's got to apply for permits for work he didn't do, schedule inspections on work he didn't do. What if they want to check out the electrical? What if we don't even know how thorough of the work was done, right? So what if they want to inspect plumbing joints? Like both kitchens were remodeled. What if they're requiring us to open up sheetrock? It could be something super, super simple, or it could be a nightmare for my client. So finding this out in due diligence is critical, right? And so I was able to point that out to my client, and we pointed it out on an addendum to, sorry, I'm gonna go back to my list, on an addendum to the seller, and basically made it the requirement of the seller to rectify the certificate of non-compliance that's been filed against the property. And in that order, I already changed the screen share, but in that order, it said that they must cause to be recorded a certificate of compliance against the property. So basically all inspections have passed off. There's an action that has to be taken care of, and that's a certificate of compliance and resolution be required against the property. So we put that back on the seller, and we said, you know what, we'll deposit earnest money 4 days after that certificate is recorded. We'll do our due diligence X amount of days after that certificate is recorded, and so on and so on, due diligence, appraisal, and settlement. So anyway, that's a long explanation for the very first point on here, but the title commitment's kind of your first, you know, eyes on due diligence to help your client. And so it's super, super important. And if you don't know, you need to ask, okay? You ask your mentor, you ask, like I said, me and Eric are here for you guys, but you call the title company too if you don't understand that kind of stuff. Because if you miss something like that, who would my client blame if he had trouble with the city down the road? Even though it's his responsibility to do his own due diligence, did he not hire me to protect him in the transaction? And should I not know more than he does? And, you know, that's the expectations, right? So even you guys that are new, don't let that make you too nervous. That's a lot of weight put on your shoulders, because you guys have access to a team to kind of go through your first transactions together till you get more comfortable, and everyone's going to be a little bit different. But you're starting to do your job for your client right there, starting from seller disclosures. So the title commitment, I spent a little bit of time on that, but it's important that you put eyes on that. And if you don't understand something, you need to ask. Anybody have any comments or questions about that?
I have a comment / question.
Okay.
So if they don't have access to the Salt Lake County recorder, would they just call title and ask them, like, because you had to log on and look up that exemption, right?
Mm-hmm. So at least Nate, I'm not sure in Oregon what it's like for you, but it's kind of a newer integration with our MLS to be able to pull public documents from the recorder's office. But normally what they're pulling is not every document recorded against a property. They're pulling ownership. They're pulling transfers, like when did the property last sale? What liens are on the property? So a certificate of noncompliance like this that's on the property isn't going to be something we're going to see from the MLS. So to answer your question, Sydney, yeah, I invest in subscribing to the online service for Salt Lake County. Utah County's free. Some counties aren't even having documents online, some of the smaller counties in Utah. But the quickest path is to, call the title company, ask them if they can further explain or produce documents for item number 13 on the title commitment. Most of them, they've got a whole department of people. That's what they do, right? So you're going through the escrow officer or their assistant that sent you the report and asking for that. 9 times out of 10, they're just going to email you back with the documents, even if that means it's amendments to CC&Rs, anything that it could be on there. That one of the things it refers to is easements as per the recorded plat. Well, what if they didn't give you the plat map? You can't look at what the easements might be that are dictated on the plat map if they didn't give you one. That's a common one for a title company to miss. So yeah, go back to them and ask them for those documents for clarification. And now you're going to your client and say, hey, we found this out. It could be an issue. It could not be an issue. In this case, we don't want to take on the responsibility of a previous owner that is going to flow through to us now as the new owner to rectify a situation that they should have pulled permits before they did the work in the first place. So most title companies are going to help you with those documents, Sid. The other one that we're going to review is if it's in a homeowners association, there's a lot of documentation we're going to want to look at, right? We're going to want to look at the CC&Rs. We're going to want to look at any rules and regulations. We're going to want to look at the budget and any minutes of meetings that they've had. So we can kind of see what's going on in that HOA. Is it run properly? Some of them are really, really helpful, and they send you a link or a zip file with everything you ask for. Other ones are very, very difficult. They're going to point you to online servers and say, you can download it here, okay? And that's usually a server that is for owners, not realtors. Owners have login information where they can download documents pertinent to the HOA documentation, but not you as a realtor. So sometimes it takes a little bit of jumping through hoops. If you're a non-owner, they charge you, some of them charge per page that you're downloading. And so that can be a little bit of a tricky one. But remember, in the purchase contract, it's the seller's responsibility to provide you with, and if you look up the REPC, it has a list, if available, and on the HOA, it has a list of all the things that if it's available, they're supposed to supply that to you, not supply you with a link where you can go pay for it yourself. They're supposed to supply you with the documentation. So stay on your other agents to get that. And we can talk more about that later. If you have any questions about tracking down the HOA documents, reach out to me, Sydney, Ashley. Ashley does that for us, and she's learned a couple of workarounds or how to be a little bit more direct to make sure we can get that documentation to review. We want to know if the HOA restricts pets, right? We want to know if it restricts outbuildings like a shed in your backyard or a fence. There's any weird thing that could be in there. You want to at least put eyes on it and see if anything stands out to you, and always encourage your clients to look at it themselves. They're buying this property. They're going to not want to know what the rules are going to be in the association that they're buying into. So these other instructions on here, guys, just save it to your Dropbox or your Google Drive, however you're formulating your folder trees. I showed you last week or 2 weeks ago when we were going over this, kind of how I do my folders to make it easy to find documents. So come up with a system that works for you so you can keep all of your due diligence items separated. Let's see. Yeah, confirming the HOA information. The agent is going to maybe tell you what the dues are. They're going to maybe tell you if there's a transfer fee or if there isn't a transfer fee. You want to go directly to the source of the HOA and ask them that question, at least get a paper trail or an email trail of what those fees are. And they're usually readily accessible by somebody in the admin department of the HOA that they can send those over to you. Because if they pulled like even the HOA dues from an old MLS listing, it could say $150 for the HOA monthly dues, and it's actually risen to $250 since they sold that property 2 years ago, right? You're going to want to know that for your client because that's going to affect probably their ability to get a loan if they're right at their threshold. Seller property condition disclosures. This one's kind of an obvious one. The seller is going to answer, 7 pages of yes or no questions if they're aware of any past or present problems with the property. All you can do is hope that they're honest on this, because if they know of a problem with the property, you buy the property, they didn't disclose it with you. Like say the basement had flooded and now you discover there's mold in there. And then the neighbors tell you, oh yeah, it flooded, just 5 months ago or whatever. I'm just kind of making up an example. It's now your client's responsibility to go back and sue the owner because that may have affected their decision whether or not they bought the property. You can't hold all sellers to accountability for being honest, but you can at least get in writing what they are disclosing to you for future reference. So that's important to go through. And when we're on the selling side, guys, we're explaining to our clients to just be completely transparent. Even if they think it's minor, don't assume it's going to be minor for the buyer. So when you're on the selling side, you just tell them to answer in as much detail as they can possibly remember about any of the questions that are asked in the seller disclosures, and just protect themselves from liability. Obviously, we're getting signatures on those documents. We're saving the folders. We're giving the fully executed copies back to the seller's agent. And of course, we're giving our buyers copies of those documents. Home inspection reports, another important part of due diligence. I don't know what your guys's preference will be, but I like to go on the walkthrough with my clients and the inspector after the inspection's done. I don't just leave it up to them and say, hey, let me know if there's anything of a concern. I like to be on the walkthrough because I like to hear the explanation along with my client on what the inspector is telling him his discovery was on the property. So we're both hearing it firsthand, and now we can have a better conversation about it if he's not trying to repeat what the inspector told him, if I was there too, right? So for me, that's an important step because I get through due diligence concerns a lot quicker when I can give my opinion on what I think they should be concerned about. And for me, that's usually safety or health concerns. If it's going to be a hazard to them living in that property, obviously we want to address it. If it's cosmetic, it's up to the client what they're really going to pursue or not. In this seller's market, buyers aren't really asking for a lot of small minor things to be fixed by the seller because they want to buy the property and they don't want to bring up a lot of minor things that they're not going to be able to work out with the seller and possibly kill a deal. So that's a conversation to have with your clients. And again, reach out to me and to Eric and those that have done them before and get some advice, talk through it. You don't need to try and guess at this thing. Sydney has the luxury of seeing us almost every day in the office and bringing up things, that conversations she's having with her clients, but feel free to text and say, hey, this came up on our inspection report. How important is it? How hard is this? And we're going to have a conversation basically on what does your client think? What does your client want to do? Does your client want to get estimates from contractors? Does your client want to try and get some work done prior to settlement so that they're not stuck with the responsibility after? There's a lot of different strategies on how to negotiate that, and we're happy to help you with that. But the home inspection report is something that's really important to go through with your clients. We've done full trainings on radon. We're going to order that no matter what, as soon as we're under contract, right? We're going to order radon because Utah Radon Services anyway doesn't charge for that. We want to know if there's high levels in the home. We're just going to order that. We'll address it if the results come back as a positive. Now mold, I don't know what you guys think. Mold, I mean, as a realtor, you're really not suggesting to your clients not to do any inspection, whether it's mold or meth or radon. Never downplay the importance of any test. However, in my opinion, I like to save them money if they don't feel like they need it. If they don't feel like it, not if I don't feel like they need it. What if you tell your clients that you don't think they need a mold test, and then they find out there's mold in the house after they bought it, and you said that you didn't think that they were, it was important enough to do a test? Well, hopefully your errors and admission insurance is going to help you out with that, because it could turn into a lawsuit. But what I like to do is say, hey, let's do the home inspection first. And based on the discovery of the home inspector, let's see what his recommendations are based on his observations of previous water damage or repairs that could be done that look like they're from a previous leak, maybe odors, Maybe they got a moisture reader and they can tell there's moisture in the wall. Then that might further some further information, right? But that, in my opinion, isn't a 100% every single home gets a mold test. But I definitely don't discourage my clients from getting it. But I want to see some sort of evidence that it's warranted before they're putting out hundreds of dollars for all of these tests. Meth is another one. Obviously, I don't discourage them from getting meth results, but I'm going to really push for them to get a meth test if I know it's been a rental property for many years, because that owner doesn't know who's been in the property. Sometimes owners don't even know what their guests have done in the property, right? But if it's a rental property and the transient nature of that and people coming and going and their friends and in and out of the house and parties and whatnot, 100% of the time I'm pushing them. And of course it's their decision, but I'm pushing them to get a meth test on a rental property for sure. Okay, and then we're going to verify all the utilities for the property. You know, what water district it is in. Is the sewer and garbage included in the property taxes like some municipalities do, or is it a separate bill they're required to do? Just a little bit of extra over and above help. Obviously, your clients can find out how to put the utilities in their name, but if you can find that out for them and create a system to get them that information, then that's obviously going to be helpful for them. Any questions on those inspection items that are going to happen like right away? That's what you're going to get on as soon as you're under contract. You're calling your inspector, right? You might have a 7, 10, very, very few 14-day inspections anymore if it's a multiple offer situation. I mean, due diligence period. So you got to move quick, right? And so that's why that's all going to be done in week 1. You're going to really get busy once you go under contract. But if there's no questions on that, we'll kind of move on. The appraisal. I like to, well, it depends. I like to do the inspection first and make sure there's no deal killers. If there's some major issues and my client just says, no, I can't handle it, there's just way too much, there's too big of a to-do list on this property, I don't want to move forward, then we don't want to have already done the appraisal out of order, right? So in this market, appraisers are pretty backed up. So you're pretty safe to actually order the appraisal. If your inspection scheduled for just a couple of days out, because the appraiser is not going to get there before your inspection anyway. And worst case scenario, you find out the house is just a disaster. There's a lot of big ticket items that your client doesn't want to move forward on, and you can cancel an appraisal before they actually go out there. So kind of work with your lender on that and see how quickly things are getting done, because they're going to be the ones that actually order the appraisal for you. So a good relationship with your appraisal or your lender and working with the appraisers is pretty important.
So something, just a little comment on that. I'm actually working with one of my clients, their lender, not necessarily someone we worked with before. And so our preferred lender, we kind of have a protocol of like order it and then we can always cancel it. But when I was working with a different lender, they have their own appraisal or appraisers. And he was telling me basically like, oh, well, my appraisers are right on track, so we don't even order until after we find out if the home inspection's good or not, like if you're going to be moving forward. And so it's always nice to just ask whatever lender you're going to be working with, like how far they are or how far out their appraisers are.
Yeah, you've had a couple with some unique personalities you've worked with. So when it's not your preferred lender, you could have some challenges, and then you'll find out why you have preferred lenders, right? Some of them, well, one in particular that Sydney's working with seems bothered by every phone call that he gets from her, just in helping clarify things for her client, because all he's done is confuse her client. And so she tries to help with that. And he seems pretty bothered by the whole process, and that makes it really, really tough. So that's why we don't steer them and require them to use our lender, but I highly recommend somebody that I've done business with that has a personality and a work ethic that's going to really take care of them in the transaction for sure. But that's a good point, Sid.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
I was just curious, going back to the title commitment. I'm sure, I've got to imagine that you've encountered situations where something, you discovered something that was just, it was a nightmare anyway. Did you ever encounter a situation where it was just so sideways that the whole deal unwound? And number two, am I right in assuming that even in situations where a huge problem is uncovered that's not easily solved, I'm guessing you were at least able to maintain trust with your client because, hey, you went above and beyond and you actually uncovered the problem, even though it may be a mess. You demonstrated that you were doing your job.
For sure. Yep. Yep. And I would say probably the biggest issue that comes up that possibly couldn't get resolved is when somebody has judgments that they're not aware of. Because a judgment actually precedes recording of a title transfer. I don't know if you know that. So if you have a judgment against you, DL, and you go to buy a house and say that title company misses it, or for whatever reason, that you buy the property. Well, if the judgment comes up later, that judgment's actually in first lien position ahead of your trust deed securing the loan that you just got to buy that property. That's why they don't just search the property, they search the people. So on the last part of that PR, you're going to see the names of the buyer and the seller were searched for judgments and none were found, hopefully. Well, when the one shows up in your client's name or even in the seller's name, it's the title company's job to work with them to clear that judgment, but it's also your job to communicate with them that the judgment exists, for one, and what needs to be done about that. So that's the only thing I've run across that's actually killed a deal, is when somebody wasn't able to satisfy a judgment, either financially, or they weren't able to get a release from the person that had the judgment against them, that wouldn't sign off on it because they said they didn't get paid, but my client said that they paid them. Other than that, it's usually minor things. It's showing you what's already on the property. So there are conditions that have to be met in order for the insurance to be filed, like a judgment would be one of those conditions. But you're going to see things like the property taxes need to be paid current, right? The lien for the first and the second mortgage that's on the property needs to be cleared and paid and satisfied before the loan can be issued. So the title company has to show that all those conditions have been met to meet the funding requirements to receive the money from the lender and then record the deed. They can't record the deed until all those things have been signed off on. So it's things like that non-compliance order, or maybe there was a boundary line agreement recorded against the property. I've seen that where two property owners have decided together to move the property line 4 feet one way or the other, or whatever it was. My neighbor had one that was 18 inches because one of the owners built a brick wall and it wasn't on the property line. So rather than tear down the wall, they just did a new boundary line agreement and said, okay, we're going to establish this is the new property line. Well, your buyer's going to want to know that, right? So little things like that just kind of affect what they think they're getting or what you're looking for. And 9 times out of 10 or more, I'm looking at it and I'm replying back to Ashley to go ahead and let my client know that I didn't find any items of concern on there.
Understood. That makes a lot of sense. It's pretty intimidating for a noob like me, but I'm sure for the first couple of transactions, you're walking us through this list, which I can see this is a huge resource. And one other really quick question, and I'll back off. I read recently, I don't know where this agent was from, but this was a conversation with regards to the value proposition that an agent brings to a real estate transaction. And this agent mentioned, again, I don't know where this agent is from, but they mentioned that if an error is made on the REPC with regards to, it was something like radon or lead, something along those lines, some sort of hazard, that it results in their state in an $11,000 fine or sanction per error. And this agent mentioned this to really just underline the fact that we are bringing a great deal of value by guiding people through these transactions that potentially can be hugely catastrophic. And this list here actually seems to kind of reinforce that. So what are your thoughts on that? And does such a thing exist in Utah where if you make a mistake like that, it can cost you very dearly?
Well, I don't know of a per error type of fee like that, but let's go back up here to the seller disclosures. We've talked about this in lead generation classes on just pointing out the fact that the seller's responsibility to provide seller property condition disclosures to the new buyer to eliminate liability of them coming back on the seller for known issues that weren't disclosed to them about the condition of the property. If it materially affects the value of the property, it's not up to the seller to decide whether it'll affect the value up for the buyer. And if they don't provide those disclosures and they use a Utah REPC that says they shall provide those things, well, the buyer's not making a decision based on what was required of the seller to disclose to them. So yeah, there could be, on the listing side, you're talking to a for sale by owner, there could be some potential liability there for not disclosing. We're required, you brought up lead-based paint, we're required to give a disclosure of lead-based paint possibility of being in the home of older than 1978 construction, right? Because it was very prevalent in the building materials back then. There isn't one really for asbestos, but lead-based paint is one of those where that disclosure needs to be given to eliminate the liability for the seller. Now, I just pointed out an example on a buyer. Let's say Michael said, I don't need no stinking agent. I can go buy this house on my own. I mean, all I got to do is, and he's a cash buyer too. So he's paying cash for this house. All I got to do is take a look at the house, maybe get an inspection. Looks good, right? What if he never even looked at the PR? If he didn't even look at the title commitment or didn't know what he was looking at, or maybe one was not even provided to him because there wasn't a realtor involved, then he could have inherited that potential problem that could turn into quite a mess by buying this property that has this permit issue on the property. So really, when transactions go smooth, that's why people think they don't need a realtor. Because in their eyes, and you want all your clients to think they're smooth, right? You're going to deal with all this shit behind the scenes, and they're going to think, wow, that was easy. I didn't even really need a realtor. That was probably the best transaction you've ever had. So sometimes you don't get credit for the behind the scenes things that you do, but that's okay. That's your job. You want your clients to have a good experience and a good transaction. And so I hope they all go to the closing table just happy about the whole process. It was smooth, and those that know that you're looking out for them are going to give you credit for making it a smooth transaction. And others are going to say, you know what, next time I buy a house, I don't think I really need a realtor. Nothing went wrong, right? You're protecting from people from potential problems that they don't even know about. And so it's really hard to sell the value on a particular transaction that may or may not have inherent issues with it, right? And so I always say, you don't know what you don't know. And I've done hundreds of transactions, and maybe my for sale by owner, this is his third, right? He doesn't know what he doesn't know. He hasn't encountered something that really could have cost him tens of thousands of dollars yet. You wouldn't want this to be the first deal that happens on. So I'm with you there, DL. The value of the service we provide is there. Selling that or conveying that to a buyer or a seller is another issue, depending on their personality. And if they don't get it, they don't get it. And you're not going to spend a lot of your time trying to convince somebody of an opinion that they don't have. Hopefully you come highly recommended from somebody that you did make happy, and they don't care why. They just know they should use you because you took care of somebody that they know. And so anyway, I'm kind of rambling about that, but I'm on the same page as you. There's things that buyers and sellers don't know that they need to be aware of, and we need to just help them through that transaction.
Something I wanted to add to, oh, sorry, DL. You want to go ahead?
I'm sorry. I was just going to say that's awesome. I don't want to be sleazy or be in the arm twisting business. It's like you're saying, we're looking for the right people. But thank you, Jeff. Hope I didn't gum up the works with a silly question.
No, not at all. I want more questions and commentary and involvement. I want this to be a discussion, all of these trainings. I feel like I'm in my office just talking to my screen. And so it's nice to know somebody's there on the other side. And Sydney, what were you going to say?
I just wanted to add, since DL was kind of asking a question about the PR as well, something I found interesting is that when you do receive the PR from the title company, they don't necessarily point out things or draw your attention to items on the PR. It's your job to review it and then be like, oh, what is this exclusion here? And then do a little bit more research or reach out to them for further information. For some reason, I thought that was weird when I got my first PR, and I was like, so if there was a judgment, they wouldn't have like said, pay attention to A, B, and C. They just send it to you. And so I just wanted to kind of point that out, that it is our job to review it. They're not going to point things out to us on their end.
Well, and let me make now, since you brought that up, one more comment about PRs. I guess we could have a whole training on every aspect of these, but this is kind of like a checklist of things to look for. And we'll walk you through that process when it comes up. But what I'm reviewing for my buyer, this is a buyer's checklist, right? So what I'm reviewing is actually the PR that the seller's title is giving to me. Now, my title company might be closing my side of the transaction, right? But the title commitment that they're providing is for the lender. They're doing the lender's policy. So the coverage and the title commitment coming from the seller is the one that's going to be providing the owner's, my buyer becoming the new owner is going to get an owner's title insurance policy. So here's another thing about relationships. I often call my title company on the buyer's side and ask him questions about the seller's title commitment. For one, I'm going to get him quicker. I'm going to get his, straight to the point answer to my question. If I can't even get a hold of the other title company, which is a thing, ask any lender you work with if they've got, just like realtors and lenders, right? There's good and there's bad. My lender has a short list of title companies that he just cringes every time he has to do a deal with them because they're not as professional as others that he likes working with, right? So some title companies don't provide him with the information he needs to get the deal done. So I go to my guy a lot. I've been using the same escrow officer for, it's damn near 20 years. It's been a long time since I was an investor. And we have a relationship that way. So if I need further explanation, I can't get it from the seller's title company. I'm getting it from my guy. Let me open up the chat here. PR stands for preliminary title report, is just an abbreviation people use a lot. DL for PR, it's a preliminary report. It's often referred to as the title commitment or a commitment to provide title insurance. It's saying, hey, based on these conditions and these exemptions, we're going to issue this title policy. And Kim, what did you mean by property review?
I was guessing what PR meant.
Oh, I didn't even notice. Yeah, the same.
I put question mark at the end. I'm like, maybe.
Gotcha. So yeah, kind of. It's kind of a review of the property, the condition of the title of the property, right? And what they're saying needs to be rectified before they'll insure it. So yeah, that's great. But it's a preliminary title report or a commitment for title to provide title insurance. So each one of these things, it's, yes, this is a checklist. We're going to do these things, but sometimes it brings up more work, right? Sometimes the title commitment looks great. There's nothing of concern. We move right on. So we're at appraisal right now. Let's say the appraisal doesn't come in at value. So we have an appraisal deadline. What are our options if the property doesn't appraise for what my client's willing to pay for it? Well, they can cancel the contract, right? Or they can renegotiate with the seller the purchase price to coincide with the appraisal price, right? Or they have to bridge the gap between the appraisal and the purchase price, because oftentimes people are putting down the minimum down payment. Let's say they're putting down 5%. If the appraisal comes in 5% lower than their purchase price, well, now the amount that the lender will loan on is 5% less than the purchase price, because they're going to go off the lower of the two, the appraisal or the purchase price. So now our client, our buyer, still needs to put 5% down, but it's of the appraisal price, not of the purchase price anymore. So now we got a 10% spread. Does that make sense? So now, well, my client's getting a 5% down loan because he only has 5% to put down. So he can't just say, well, I want it at that price, right? The only circumstance where that doesn't matter is if somebody's putting down like 30% or more. right? And their minimum down payment requirements for the loan they're getting, let's say, well, I mean, the maximum they would have to put down to get that type of loan would probably be 20%. Pretty much the same loan product between 20% and 30% down payment. So if they're already putting more down and the property appraises for less, it probably won't affect their loan. And so that just means they're getting a little bit bigger loan than they thought instead of putting more money out of their pocket.
Jeff, let me cut in and make sure I understand. So you're saying if the down payment is larger, excuse me, and the property fails to appraise at the anticipated amount, that larger down payment could serve as a buffer to cover the distance?
Well, it could, because of the larger down payment means they're still meeting the requirements for the lender. Now the difference, the disparity still has to be met. So that means, let's say in the same case, somebody's putting down 30%. It's the same loan whether they put down 20 or 30%, right? Well, if that appraisal comes in 5% lower than the purchase price, that buyer has another option that the minimum down payment buyer doesn't have, and that is he can borrow 5% more. So in a sense, now he's only putting down 25% because the other 5% is going towards bridging that gap between the appraisal and the purchase price. Now, that's not going to be our first course for our buyer. The first action we're going to take is to try and get the seller to reduce the purchase price to match the appraisal, because that's what the appraiser is saying the value is, right? And so hopefully it's not too big of a difference that the seller doesn't absorb all of that. But that's where negotiation comes in. The seller might say, I'll half it with you. You as an agent might say, you know what, we're still $1,000 off. I'm making $15,000 commission on this. I'm going to credit you $1,000 of my commission. Let's get this done. I know you love this house. You know, that's again, not your first course of action either, but you have that right if you want to help your client get this deal, because they love that house and they absolutely don't want to start the search over again. That's where you got to get creative. So when that disparity happens between an appraisal, we're going to just talk about it and we're going to kind of explore our options as agents collaborating, but then also you're going to take that to your client and say, here's what your options are. I mean, if nothing works, nobody's budging, they have the right, and you're going to protect their earnest money by just canceling the contract. By no means should any of your clients ever lose their earnest money. There's deadlines that have to expire before it becomes non-refundable for that contingency, right? And you're going to address that or cancel in writing before that deadline ever expires. So we'll just, every deal's a little bit different. It could be off by a couple thousand. It could be off by 20,000. It really just depends on where they came in, the competitive nature of multiple offer situations, stuff like that. Jordy shared a very interesting stat with us today in our training at noon. He was talking about how many properties were under contract a month ago and how many sold this month. And the difference was half of the properties that were under contract didn't actually close that next month. They went back active because people were tying up properties by just trying to win the bid and then not necessarily getting to the closing table. So they're, I think he mentioned one example is like, hey, let's tie this one up and then let's go keep looking at other properties, see if we can find something you like better. So every property that goes under contract doesn't always close with that buyer. So that was kind of an interesting fact that he shared with us.
I'm raising my hand.
Oh, I didn't see you there. Go.
I would like to have more training on this down payment and the appraisal and stuff like that, because that actually helps me understand better, you know, for my client and what they're doing, you know, as far as appraisals and the money down and the different options that they might have. Can we do a whole nother training just on the lending side of it?
Sure. And maybe we'll bring in one or two of our lenders because that's really where the communication goes. Every one of my clients has different capabilities when it comes to how much they can afford on a house, what their debt to income ratio is versus other clients, what they qualify for based off their income and their credit score, right? Because you got to marry up the two. So certain loan programs have a threshold that they have to meet for credit, but also for income, compared to their debt, right? So if they get over a certain percentage of debt to their income, they lose certain potential loan options. So a relationship with the lender, and this is where Sydney was having some trouble with this other lender I mentioned before, is she's just doing her homework, making sure that she's not showing properties to her client that they can't afford.
Right. And with the HOA, that's even something else we need to add into it. And both you and Eric have both said, if it has an HOA, they're going to be able to afford less house because the HOA fees.
Yeah,
So,
because that's going to become a new payment for them, right?
Right.
That they don't have before they bought the house. So most buyers aren't factoring that in. They think if they can qualify for $400,000, they're looking at homes and townhomes up to their maximum, right? They're looking at $400,000. And if that $400,000 townhome that's brand new, it's in a great community, has a $250 HOA fee, that's a whole different ballgame. So again, the relationship with the lender, and that's a great idea, Kim. We'll do a training on that because I have such a good relationship with my lender. Most of you know Corey. He's done a training for us and he's been at my office, but I still verify with him when I know it's close because I know their maximum purchasing power and I make estimations based on how much to lower that purchasing power based on, X amount of HOA fees. But there's so many variables besides that. For instance, their homeowner's insurance is going to be different. If they buy a single family home, their homeowner's insurance is insuring the entire house. With a condominium, they're only insuring the inside of the walls in. The rest of the insurance is already in their HOA fee. Okay, the HOA fee is going to cover the insurance for the outside of the building. So their hazard insurance might come down, even though the HOA fee went up. So that marriage between, okay, how much did it drop the estimated insurance on a single family home because the insurance is now over in this HOA. So it can kind of get messy, but Corey literally sits at his program on the computer. I give him purchase price, HOA fee, estimated property taxes. Well, we estimate insurance, but the property taxes we can look up and verify. And he plugs it all in a program he's already started for that client. He's already got all their qualifications in there, and he's going to tell me, hey, I'll often call him and say, we're in a multiple offer situation here. I got to be as aggressive as we possibly can be because I love this house. And whatever they can qualify, they're willing to spend on this house. So what's their maximum? And here's the numbers. Boom, 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 boom. And it'll be different from this single family home to this townhome to this condo. It's going to be a different number based on those HOA fees and those insurances and the purchase price. And so relationships, again, your team that you have behind you become your preferred vendors for a reason, because they don't mind when you call them 5 times a day and ask them questions, because there's a reciprocal relationship there. And I send my clients to him for a reason, because he's going to take care of them. And so he takes care of me. So yeah, let's do that. Let's do a training on that so we can get more lender specific. And I say that to my clients all the time. Hey, that's a lender question. I'm not going to pretend to know the market and the fluctuations of the interest rate within the same day that my lender watches to lock his rate. He's not going to just say, hey, you qualify for a loan today, and locks their rate right when they go under contract. A good lender is going to watch those fluctuations. He's up on the news and what affects the interest rates, and he knows if it's going to have an upswing or a potential downswing. And so he'll knows when to hold back and when we better lock it, because it's probably going to bump up 1/8 of a point or whatever. I don't know all that stuff, and I don't pretend to. I just need to align myself with somebody that does, right? Does that answer that? Is that anything else on that topic, Kim? Okay, guys, we're kind of getting towards the end here, and it's top of the hour. So let me kind of rip through these last little things. Some of the things you do to kind of close up the transaction. Of course, if you're doing your own transaction management, we're in SkySlope. This says .loop because I used this when I was at Keller Williams, and we use .loop. So that's an edit I can make on there. But homeowners, once they find a home, they're under contract, the inspection went well, the property appraised, most of them do not want to keep getting your daily hot sheets about new homes that sit on the market or that are hitting the market. Most of them want you to unsubscribe them from that because they They have their house. They're excited about this one. They're going to be moving to that. My investor clients, though, they just like to keep an eye on the market. So just ask them, hey, do you want me to shut off your hot sheets or leave them on? That's just kind of like a housekeeping item as you're nearing the end of a transaction. And so I have that as a checklist item because Ashley will literally reach out to him and ask him and say, hey, do you want to keep getting the hot sheets or do you want to turn them off? And if we don't do that and somebody unsubscribes, see, that kind of goes against my rule is I don't like anybody to have to ask me for things. I like to perform it or give it to them before they have to ask me for it. And so if I got a client that has to unsubscribe because they're tired of getting the hot sheets and I never even ask them if I could just do that for them, it's just kind of one of those, you know, service things that kind of bug me. So that's why that's on there, is I just basically ask them. Final walkthroughs are important. If your client can't do a final walkthrough within days, this says 1 to 7 days prior to closing. I like to do it the day before, the night before, or even the day of. Sometimes if I got a morning closing, we're driving to the property and doing a walkthrough right after, before it funds and records. You never know what's going to happen. I had a listing that was supposed to have pictures taken today. He called me this weekend. He put in new countertops. He painted his cabinets. He did some upgrades for me so I can get top dollar for him, right? We want to present the best product possible. Well, the countertop guy slid the dishwasher back in without hooking it up. That's the plumber's job. They just pushed it in the hole. And his wife loaded it and started a load of dishes and left. And it flooded their whole kitchen. It went down through the sheetrock into the basement, flooded a whole bedroom, and sheetrock just, you know, falling down from the ceiling. The day before I was supposed to take pictures. Well, it's possible something like that could happen the day before closing too, right? Maybe, well, what I've actually seen happen is the sellers are moving out and they unhook their fridge and their little water shut off valve for their ice maker and their water dispenser is leaking. And they, or the washing machine is another one that leaks and there's water all over from them taking their washer and dryer the night before closing. So final walkthroughs are important. You never know. And it's just something, again, protect your clients. You're going to do that for them if they can't go. FaceTime them, take pictures, do whatever you got to give them the opinion because you don't want them to inherit a problem.
I had a friend that the day before closing was cleaning her oven and did a self-cleaning and left with the kids to go shopping, came back and her house was burnt down.
No. Oh my gosh. See, that's
Closing.
horrible. That's a bad one. Never had one that bad.
Yeah.
But that can happen, right?
Yeah.
So, and let's say whose insurance covers it? You know, if the seller still owns it, what if the seller actually canceled their insurance a day early? You don't want to do that. You want your sellers to pay for several days to allow for delays for funding and recording after they think that closing is, not the day of closing. Because then if that gets extended and it doesn't close yet and they have an issue and they don't have insurance, how bad is that? You know? So same thing with your clients. It's required by the lender that insurance be in place as a condition of funding for the loan for that exact reason. We're not going to even take the chance of having a 1-day window that something could happen to our collateral. So that insurance has to be paid for by the title company as a condition of closing. You're going to see that right on a title commitment as well. So anyway, final walkthroughs, schedule that for your clients, do it for them if they can't be there. Have them sign off if they don't want to do one. Have them sign off that they elected not to do one. There's a form for that. Let's see. Send an email to buyer requesting. Oh, this is just more of just a marketing type thing. This, email to buyer requesting a photo. If you're doing the final walkthrough, and this is just kind of like a thing Sydney likes to do, post a congratulations on Instagram or Facebook. Congratulations to the new homeowners. Get a picture of them in front of their house, right? Shows people that you're doing transactions. So if you're not there and you don't get that at the walkthrough, that's kind of what this checklist item is ask them if they'll do that for you. Marketing photos, same thing. Scheduled closing, obviously. Coordinate with everybody about the closing. Confirmation email. Our confirmation email is basically just a congratulations, confirmation of the time, the address, the location, probably even a Google Maps link to closing. Make no mistakes about it. and a reminder to change the utilities. Ashley has done a really good job crafting kind of like a template that she sends out to them, and she'll look up the utility companies in the municipality where they're buying and provide the phone numbers and make it super, super easy for them. Here's the water company, in the Kearns Improvement District, where you're buying, and here's Dominion Gas and those kind of things. So that's just one thing that just makes the transaction kind of nice for the clients, makes it easy, help them get those last little housekeeping items done for themselves. That's what I just stated, the utility company's contact information in the email. Depending on what you do for closing gifts, sometimes you got to plan ahead for that. We've played around with a lot of different things. Find something that suits your personality or the personality of your clients. It could just be a gift card, or it could be something more personal. Lynn likes to do baskets and put little personal things in there that have to do with them or their kids or their pets and stuff like that. Congratulations card would go with that gift. Let's see what else is on here. One of the last things you're going to do 3 days before closing, they got to issue that closing disclosure, right? So you're going to verify their cash to close. Now, this is another lender thing, but you're still their advocate in the transaction. And I guarantee you, your clients are going to have more face-to-face and more communication with you than they are their lender. A lot of times my clients are meeting the lender at the title company the day of closing for the first time. They do a lot of things online, right? And they communicate through text and email. So even when it is a lender question, you're gonna be kind of the front man that's gonna get all of that. So look at the closing disclosure, because if they got a question, they're likely to call you before they call their lender, and you want to kind of have at least laid eyes on it, and no surprises for them, right? If they're expecting a certain amount of cash needed for closing, a good lender is going to have already prepped them for that. But sometimes people will figure in things like the appraisal, processing fee, typical closing costs, but they forget to add in prepaids. They forget to add in that they need to pad their escrow account, that they need to pay for a year's worth of homeowners insurance up front. Those kind of things are all part of their closing costs. So it's closing costs and prepaids are potentially money out of their pocket that you want them not to be surprised about. Verify the earnest money amount versus the commission amount. This is an important one. What if your commission, say, is $10,000, but your buyer put down $20,000 earnest money? Well, if that's held at the brokerage, like it used to be with Keller Williams, 100% of the time I'd put it at the brokerage. I got to arrange to have the brokerage send that overage to the title company for closing, because they're holding more earnest money than they're going to be due for my commission. A lot of times with EXP, we're depositing earnest money at the title company. So even if there is an overage, it's already going to be there. But this was kind of a checklist item that we ran into a couple of times, because the earnest money was more than what our commission amount was. And you show up to closing and they're short funds. And it's because we missed the fact that we're holding more money at the brokerage than is due to the brokerage. Let's see. Other things are just kind of like, again, housekeeping things. Request a testimonial while they're excited and happy to be moving into their house. It's nice to have those on your website. It speaks volumes when people, in their own words, talk about their transaction with you and how it went for them. Other clients really appreciate that. And people checking you out like to read them too. Transaction document receipt is going to be part of your checklist in SkySlope. You're gonna have to submit that as part of your compliance to have the transaction be signed off from Rick. So you're gonna have them initial. And Sydney, maybe if you're still there, but I think Ashley actually, whether they already have it or not, she adds all the documents again to either a zip folder or as attachments to the email when she's sending this. So even if they've already got it, they might not remember, right, that they got addendum number 1 and 2 and 3 or whatever. So if it's all in there and they can just kind of scroll through it and look at their transaction document receipt, and they're initialing it because they just looked at it, whether they already had it, that's just an extra step. And now they can just save that into their own folder and have that as reference in one file. Sorry, we're a little bit over, guys, but basically after closing, With EXP and trying to attract agents, I haven't done this in a long time, but I used to send thank you cards to sellers agents when I had a good transaction with them all the time. I just write a little handwritten note. Hey, it's a pleasure doing a transaction with a true professional. Made the transaction smooth. Hope we have the opportunity to work together in the future. Something really simple, but we don't get thank you cards from other agents. And so imagine sending one if it truly was warranted to send them a thank you card. That's going to help that relationship when you come across them again, but it also might open up some dialogue and conversation, maybe about EXP and how they like it at their brokerage. And I wouldn't do any of that type of conversation during the transaction and divert the attention away from the transaction. But for sure, if you had a good experience working with somebody, you would want to bring up EXP to them and ask them how they like their brokerage and tell them what you like about yours and maybe set them up for a overview with us on Zoom or something. These other things, pretty simple. I guess a second testimonial request after closing. You're going to deliver the keys to the buyer. That with a closing gift at title or the final walkthrough, depending on when we do that. If you can't make it out there, realize, say your property's, way out in Magnet and I live in Draper, right? So it's a opposite end of the valley. And I'm going to go do the final walkthrough without them, and it hasn't closed yet, so they're not really entitled to the keys yet. Just communicate with the other agent on the other side. Ask the seller's agent, hey, I really don't want to make another trip out here just to open the lockbox and give them the keys, but I respect the fact that they're not going to move in and they don't get possession until it records. So are you okay if I hide the keys somewhere and then I text a picture, where I hide the keys unless they need to get back in the property, right? I text it to the seller's agent, and then I just kind of commit to them. I say, I won't send this to my client if you're okay with that, and I can get permission until it actually records, and I'll let them know where the key is, and then they can go out there with their moving van and move in. If you're going all the way across town, or especially to another county or something for a walkthrough or for a purpose, and the only reason to go back is to give them keys, just reach out to the seller's agent. Most of them are pretty workable, and some of them will adamantly say, no, do not take them out of the lockbox until it records. It is what it is, right? I don't understand why, if we can't professionally agree that I'm not going to give them, maybe they just don't trust me. I don't know, but I honor that request, and I'll go back out there and I'll open the lockbox later and give them the keys. That looks like the end of our checklist, guys. Are you still with me? Coda, you still there?
Yep, I'm still here.
All
Still
right.
here.
So here.
Good. I know there's a lot to a transaction, and DL, you kind of nailed it right there. Look at this list. I mean, do you think a buyer that thinks that they can just go out and buy a property on their own is going to think of half of these things?
I'd almost give them a copy of that and let them look at it and stew on it and come to the obvious conclusion that it's probably not something that's in their wheelhouse.
Yeah, overwhelm them a little bit. So this document is actually uploaded into our workplace group, the Marchant Workplace Group, in the files section. And so, you don't have to keep it in this format. Put it on a spreadsheet to where you can actually, drag and sort and put your own headers on there. You reword it so it makes sense to you. Some of this is repetitive, so you can kind of clean it up. I kind of need to do that to this list anyway. But just kind of make it your own. This is a good guide to get you started and kind of show you the things that you need to do and keep it top of your mind until you've done so many transactions that, it just comes naturally to you. And we can all be forgetful, but it really does become part of your nature when you've done several transactions. So this is kind of like to get you there, right?
Hey, Jeff, really quick, just a couple of things. So going back to the final inspection, we want to make sure that there's insurance in place in case there's an issue that's uncovered at the last second. Is that correct? And then I have one other quick question.
Yeah, so on the insurance, it's part of the purchase contract that it states that the seller will keep the property insured until it transfers ownership. So it's the seller's responsibility to not cancel their insurance. You don't have a lot of control over that. But for your buyer's sake, you can either refer them to a good insurance agent. Most good lenders have a handful of insurance agents they like so that they can pick an insurance, but that's going to be a condition of closing. They're not going to fund, the lender is not even going to fund the loan until they verify that there's that insurance is going to be paid for and in place. A lot of insurance officers will activate the insurance from the date of the phone call. They don't necessarily have to have received the money, which is kind of cool. So find out how that works with your insurance guy. But the payment is going to come from the title company. They're not going to leave it up to your buyer to put insurance on the company. It's going to be a requirement for the loan.
That's good. So that's a protection.
Yep.
One other quick question. There's so much back and forth about whether or not to discount commission. And earlier you gave a scenario where you might decide that it would be in the best interest of everyone involved to credit, $1,000 to allow the transaction to be consummated. And that totally makes sense. I'm guessing you were speaking from experience. Generally, it's probably something I would not do, but I didn't think about an instance like what you presented, and I can see how that might be a good time to consider that. I'm guessing you did something like that, and I have to imagine it made everyone raving fans of you.
I have done it several times, to be honest, and it's a last resort. It's like either the deal is going to die and we're going to start over and look for a secondary property that they may not love as much as this one down the street from grandma, that's in the right school district. It has the right bedroom count, this yard, all of these things. When my client is in love with that property, obviously I'm going to find every way possible to negotiate with the seller to make them happy. If our negotiations come to a standstill and I'm getting paid a full commission, or even if it's not a full commission, these days 2.5% and even 2% is quite prevalent. I have that discretionary option to say, you know what, my client is going to be super, super sad if this doesn't go through, and now I'm starting over. So it's not really selfish to say, oh, I don't want to go look at houses anymore with this client. It's like, I want to preserve their dream of living in this neighborhood, in this house that they've worked all the way up until that damn appraisal, and now their dreams are getting crushed. If I can still make that happen, then that's something that I'm going to consider, right? It's like I said, it's not going to be my first line of defense. Now, let me give you a quick example. I know we're running late, but on a different perspective on that. This same transaction that I just showed you that PR on that has the non-compliance order because the owner did not pull permits for the flip he did. We were about $20,000 apart. My client didn't want to pay more than $540. The seller did not want to come down lower than $560. The seller's agent said, hey, why don't you get your client to come up $10,000, and then I'll give up $5,000 of my commission and you can give up $5,000 of your commission, and my seller gets what he wants. And I says, well, my client doesn't want to come up $10,000. And I have never given up $5,000 of my commission to help out the seller, right? So that was my response to him. So we went back and forth for a couple of days and weren't coming to any agreement. Finally, I called my client because we were at a stalemate, 540, 560. I called my client and say, hey, can I just let this property go? Or do you have any bone to throw at the seller at all? Are you willing to come up anything at all? If not, let's move on. I don't want to keep playing this game. And he says, I'll come up 5,000. So let's go 545. So I sent an addendum to the seller signed by my client, counter offering them at $545,000. They signed it and they accepted it. Okay. So we're under contract. He sent it back to me along with the accepted offer that put us under contract at 545. He attached another document, which was buyer's or broker's commission and disbursement agreement, lowering my commission by $5,000, which I didn't agree to. So here's the mistake he made. He went under contract at $545,000 with my client based on a suggestion he had given to me earlier to make the deal work. He sent me a disbursement authorization after we were under contract, asking me to drop my commission by $5,000.
Wow.
I didn't do that for my client.
He was probably not happy.
It hasn't even come up yet. I just never returned it to him. And he hasn't asked for it yet. That's going to be a future conversation we still have yet to have. Remember, they're still working on the building permit compliance orders. They got to get that recorded against the property before we actually buy the property. It will come up at some point, but he made an assumption. Here's what he should have done. And this is why collaboration on deals and negotiation comes in handy. If this goes to our brokers, okay, the first thing they're going to say was, well, did that last addendum refer to the commission disbursement as part of the deal? It's like, no, they accepted that as presented and then sent that addendum. So there's no obligation to accept an addendum after you're already under contract, right? By either party. And I've done this before, but what I would, the proper way to do it is he should have counter offered me instead of accepted my 545, and on that counter offer incorporated the terms of the attached disbursement authorization, reducing the commissions as a condition of this transaction. So now it's part of the REPSI. Now it's part of the prior addenda, the REPSI. The commissions are part of the deal. Anyway, I feel really, really bad for him. I'm still struggling with that because depending on his seller, he may end up eating that out of his portion. And if he's already given up $5,000 of his commission, and now he has to eat my $5,000 that he assumed that I was going to give up, that's not going to be a good situation.
Wow, that is so heavy. And I see what you mean. Just by virtue of the fact that he would have sent back a counter offer, it would have nullified the addendum. You're right, which is what he should have done. If it gets too salty, my money's on you. You're packing pretty heavy guns.
Yeah. So all good. Anything else, guys? Anything else we want to chat about real quick, or we'll sign off, let you get about your evening? Well, glad to have you guys here. I'm glad you stuck with me the whole time, even though Eric wasn't here. He's much better at this than I am. So we miss him. We'll welcome him back next week. And appreciate you all. Love you. Reach out if you have any questions, anything I can do to help you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks,
Jeff.
Jeff.
Good night.
See ya.
See ya.